Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Purposeful Play Roundtable. Yesterday, we had multiple workshops that are now in the HQ Club and available for one more day that are all about purposeful play, game schooling, and sensory bins. Today, I have with me Lori Pruitt from On Track Solutions and Ashley White from Gypsy Gameschooler to talk to you more about purposeful play. This has definitely been a topic that has been requested a lot in the group, so I wanted to bring some people here so that we can kind of discuss tips for being able to do purposeful play in your homeschool, some benefits, and answer some questions that I've seen in the group about incorporating purposeful play in your homeschool. Thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
So the first question that I want to ask you guys is, what are your tips for incorporating purposeful play into your homeschool?
Go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, okay. So I guess one thing would be make sure you have like free time. I see so many people saying like, "Oh, well, we go to co-op on this day, and this day they've got gymnastics, and then they've got choir and piano lessons, and we have co-op again on this other day," and it just seems so overwhelming. It's like, when do you have time for just life or play or anything? So make sure you've got enough white space in your calendar that you have time for purposeful play.
And I totally agree with that the whole idea of play and productive play, it can be structured, but it needs to have that flexibility. It needs to have the spontaneity to it, to have that feel of play, but you can set it up to be productive. But I think that all play is productive because all play has a purpose. And it just thrills my heart to think that people are asking for this, because I think, especially in homeschool, sometimes if you have older children, that whole play and preschool time, kindergarten time, that they might be in another setting when they're at home, it's easy for them to get lost in the shuffle of things and not realize how important their play is. Or on the opposite side, we just want to feel better that we're going to be successful at this. So we want to see them reading, we want to see them doing those math problems and things so that we can say, whew, this is going to be okay. But that's not really what they need. They need that time to explore, because all the things that they're doing in play lays the foundation and opens the gateways for that later learning. And it's not something we want to rush. So I totally agree with Ashley that first and foremost, you need that space and that time that doesn't feel rushed.
And I would say for my tips for purposeful play is to incorporate, you can really easily incorporate a bunch of different skills into play. Whether that is like, I had this wooden train track set, and all the different pieces fit together like a puzzle. And so we all had to cooperatively work together to be able to build these train tracks, providing them with building blocks, with different tools that they can use and toys that they can play with, but that don't have a set use, something that they have to use their imagination for, and that they have to use cooperatively with other siblings, with friends, has so many benefits. You get to practice fine motor skills and putting blocks together or train tracks. You're going to have to talk with your siblings about what are they going to make, and you have to agree on these things. And so you're getting those social skills and so there are so many different things that you learn through play, especially social skills, I feel like, and fine motor skills, especially when you're at that preschool age, that you're really learning about how to be a good person. And I think that giving having tools and things like that, whether that's gardening tools and going outside and playing with a little plastic shovel and bucket, they have to figure out how they're going to be able to use that. What are they going to do with that? A lot of my siblings and I, when we were, I want to say probably the youngest was about 5 and I was about 8, we were told, all right, you guys got to go play outside, and I want you to, make some mud pies and things like that. And so we decided that we were going to have a farmer's market because our mom was selling things at the farmer's market and we wanted to be just like her. So we had one person that was the baker, another person that was making salads. And then as it went on, we were doing things like making pigments out of crushed up rocks. And it continued to get more and more complicated. But the things that we learned and the interests that we developed just from being told, go outside and go make some things. Here's some sticks, here's some shovels, go have fun. Having that unstructured time and being encouraged, and when we would come back inside, our parents asking us like, what did you guys play today? And being able to tell them and them expressing interest and listening and being an active listener, I think made a huge difference.
Yeah, and I'll add that I think Ashley and I both agree that that time and having that space there so that they're not hurried into doing something. But the backup to that is gathering the tools, the toys, the things that you know will draw those skills out of them and making them available. I know in our home, just to keep the younger ones occupied while I was working with older ones, and also to make them feel a part of school, we had school boxes or school toys. And they could only have those during our quote school time. So they felt like it was their play, but it was a little more structured. Not that I designed it and said, this is what you have to do with it. But if it's lacing cards, things that they're doing, or their puzzles or Legos or blocks, whatever it is, or if it's cutting lines on a sheet of paper, whatever it is they were doing, there were some things that maybe were a little more skill-based that were during our school time and in their school box. That helped me. I could prepare ahead of time and have it ready, and I rotated it out in and every week so that they didn't get bored with it.
I think that's a great tip. What would you guys say are, we kind of touched on this a little bit. What would you say is your top benefit that you've seen of making time for purposeful play? So you're making time for them to be able to play, and that you're making it a learning experience in some way. That's how I would define purposeful play.
I struggle with this one because my family does a lot more just free play. I just tell my kids, go outside. I don't
Yeah.
say make this or anything like that. I just go outside. I have work to do. Go. And they go and entertain themselves. So I'm like, okay, purposeful. Let's see here.
I feel like some of the benefits are, you develop these different skills, like splitting up a cookie 5 ways. When you have 4 other siblings and you have 1 cookie, you learn how to divide by 5. Those are things that you learn naturally as a part, or you having that. There is a benefit to having less structure, but focusing on things like I said, my parents would send us outside, but then they'd be like, okay, what did you learn? It was like, oh, well, found this new kind of plant and it smells this way, right? Or I found out how to be able that if I crushed up the bark of this tree, it was this color. And they were like, okay, let's learn about that tree. And so it was taking these play-based experiences that we had and helping us to learn about the world around us. And so I think that Lori, I know you talked about in your workshop on preschool math having measuring tools and measuring cups that kids could be able to play with that helps them to learn, different measurements at a really young age. But you're totally having them be able to do whatever they want and go measure whatever they want. And so there's that unstructured free play, but adding in those educational kind of touches. So they don't even realize that they're really doing schoolwork, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that's the blessing of it is that they're learning and they're developing. And when we add that layer of purpose to their play, again, I think all play serves a purpose and there's benefit that comes from it, but we can use play and plan play into what we're doing with them. Often I couldn't always do it every day, but I tried at least once or twice a week to play with that preschool child. If they were measuring, I also did it with them. Sometimes I let them give me directions like, oh, put, scoop this into here. How many cups? And we talked about it. So that was purposeful play. We were playing together. Or I could be cooking and they could be sitting in the floor with a bin of rice and the measuring cups. And we got different color ones so that we could start with that. And I could say, what happens if you put 2 of those blue ones into the one red one? I could direct them while I was doing something else, some multitasking where I was paying attention to them too. But it was purposeful getting them to reason and to think through it, but they just thought they were playing.
So one thing that my family has done a lot is a lot of different board games, obviously. And we've gone through phases where we started our day with either a math game or just any board game. And so relating back to the fractions, my kids at 4 and 5 learn their fractions from a board game.
Oh,
And
that's fantastic.
we can still to this day be like, oh, well, we're having trouble with this particular fraction, this, measuring cup or whatever. How many pepperoni pizzas are you going to need to make this measurement? And they know, and then we can do it. So we can still apply it even though we haven't played the game in years.
I love that. I was going to actually bring up, we've had a lot of questions on not just how to choose games that are educational, because that's a topic that people ask, but how to be able, what kind of skills are you going to learn from just playing board games? Can you learn, can game schooling incorporate any game? Or does it have to be specifically educational ones, the ones that are marketed as educational?
So the way I view it is game schooling is any sort of game, whether that's board, card, dice, role playing, video games, or even just imagination or voice only games or pen and paper games. And my family prefers to focus on fun games. So I'll admit we got Addition Bingo when we first started. And spoiler, it's not fun. We didn't play it much. So we got rid of it pretty quick. But, those fun games that you choose for interest and fun, I mean, at the very least, they're going to have math in the scorekeeping. But more likely, there's all sorts of other academic skills that they're learning, whether it's reading the instructions and having to figure those out. I'll often be like, okay, I forget how many cards we have to deal out here. Here, son, read the instructions and tell me how many cards to deal out. It takes them forever, but it's a skill. And then there's a lot of soft skills that you learn that I think are actually more important. Those social skills. My son is 10 and we are still working on, oh, well, things didn't go your way this time. Maybe they will next time. And it's just this constant work. But by playing, any sort of games or any sort of play, really, you can work on those more frequently.
Oh, I totally agree. Learning cooperative skills, but also learning how to be competitive but, be a good winner, be gracious when you win, but also be kind when you lose, and to celebrate somebody else's win. That is something you have to learn as a kid. It's not something that comes just right out of the box. And so I think that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to add a couple of things layered in on that is number one, when we engage that part of the brain, there's some fancy words for it, but when we engage that part of the brain that brings that emotion to the surface and we're moving, we're active like that, there's statistics, and I'm not going to quote them because I can't remember exactly, but I just know that the difference between just memorizing something and learning something, the retention rate goes up exponentially when we engage that part of our brain that is having fun and moving. So that makes games invaluable and play invaluable. I work with a lot of struggling students, challenged students, neurodiverse students who need to learn in a different way. And the more that we can use that limbic system, it's called, and engage that, the better that they remember. And another layer on the soft skills that we're learning is sometimes I talk to families, and we had days like this too. Is they're like, we're not going to try to, well, when we try to play a game, it's a disaster. Everybody ends up crying. They're at each other's throats. It just didn't go well. So it's different for different families. Some families just naturally love to play games, and other families really struggle. But rather than saying, let's not play any games, which breaks my heart to think about it, but it happens. I talk to people all the time. Instead of hesitating to play the game, it's you might need to have a time of pre-learning before you play the game. Like maybe some examples are, maybe a child who's struggling with the game, you play one-on-one with them and you're teaching them the rules of the game so that they know and understand, and they don't have to struggle in front of other siblings who may or may not choose to be kind about their learning curve. Another thing to do is buddy up. And if you have two siblings who get along well, they can partner and be on teams. That way, the younger one is being apprenticed, in a word, to be able to play the game better. And the other thing is those interpersonal skills that may have to be done one-on-one with the children. And if one person is not as gracious about winning or losing, then that gives you an opportunity to really minister to that heart. And if someone else is critical, tends to be critical, you're really going to see those things, the best reactions of your children and the worst reactions of your children. And it's not the time to say, well, we're not going to play the games because this is just too much trouble. No, it's a window into the heart and soul of where you can reach out and work with that child one-on-one on those areas where they are struggling. So I hope that helps someone to just, you might have to divide the two and not wait until you play the game to deal with all those things, but deal with them proactively. So the game's a celebration of that progress.
Oh, I love that. That I think really I I really can relate because I had so many siblings that were at different ages. And so we would buddy, depending on the complexity of the game, we'd either play cooperatively instead of competitively. We buddy up. And being able to, or even when there was a sibling I had that didn't know how to play checkers, but they wanted to be able to win and they wanted to learn it. And so I actually played one-on-one with them and taught them all the different rules and helped them so that they could be able to win against a sibling who I had also taught how to play checkers. um, but it was a really great bonding experience. And I think what we're talking about here is the benefit that homeschool brings is that we're able to not just work with kids academically, but through purposeful play, we're able to help them develop their character. And I think that that's what you're talking about is you're really able to
Exactly.
see the areas and places where they need character development. And games can be a way of being able to address some of these things, like maybe sharing is something that they're having a hard time with. So you do a game that's cooperative that you have to share so that you're able to practice because there's some skills that are going to need more practice over a longer period of time, whether that's learning that the rules don't, like playing cooperatively in a competitive game. When I was younger, I'm the oldest, so I was the rule follower. I wanted all the rules to be followed exactly. And then there was times where they were like, "No, let's play this differently so that everybody gets to participate and have fun and there's not one winner." And that taught me to be willing to compromise and to focus on other people having fun not just winning. And so there's so many different skills that you can learn, not just from board games, but through, free play. And I remember my parents, one of the things they did, I'm a homeschool graduate, so I speak from a perspective of being a homeschooled. But one of the things that they did that I really respected later and as when I graduated is they would never get involved in any of our pretend imaginary play arguments. They would always moderate them and make sure that we were kind and respectful, but they're like, you have to solve your imaginary play arguments. And they would give us tips like maybe you should be, maybe saying that wasn't very nice and that person's upset now. And so that gave us the opportunity to be able to work through how to respectfully disagree with people, which when you have 4 siblings is a skill you're going to need to learn. And how to be able to debate something. And so whether it's free play, structured play, or game schooling, I feel like you're able to build you're able to build the kids' character. And like you said, Lori, really see a window into where they might be struggling that you can work with them one-on-one.
Back to what you were saying, Lori, about how families will be like, oh, well, every time we try and play a game, it's a disaster, so we're just not going to play games. We have to pick and choose which games we can play, which games we're up for. And there are certainly games that we cannot play at that point in time. If people are being sensitive that day, okay, Potato Pirates is right out. We can't play that game because it's really cutthroat. I've recently decided I don't like Catan because every time you play it, you get cut off or you're cutting somebody else off. And that's just too cutthroat for me. So I have chosen recently that, that's a game I'm going to sit out on. But there's plenty of other games that are much less cutthroat, that are competitive, but not, I'm going to beat the other person, but rather I'm going to win. There's a difference. And then, like you were saying, Amelia, we did a lot of, oh, well, this competitive game is really fun, but we can't play competitive games right now, so we're going to change the rules and make it cooperative. So we've done that a lot too.
So
And
go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Lori.
No, I'm on generation 2.0 with my grandchildren now. My oldest granddaughter is 9, and they're all different ages. So the games that we choose to play, it's relative to those ages. But for instance, there's a game called Quirkle, and it's a reasoning and critical thinking game that can be as complex as you want it to, but we can change the rules like we want, and where we might require someone who's older and more experienced to have to create a more complex pattern, where if I want to play it with one of the other younger children, I will say just match the colors, as long as the color matches. And it's skill building because later we'll build on that and go to something else. And even playing with them, I'll play dolls with my grandchildren, and they're working out things. They're things that they're thinking about relationships, and it's that same thing about watching them, but also interacting and saying, well, do you think that's going to be encouraging if you say it that way? And they can rethink it. And you don't want to overdo, but you have to be aware. It helps to be aware of how they are developing socially. When they're very young, they're just copying. They're copying you, they're copying what they've heard and trying it out for themselves. And then they get a little bit older and they start to insert their own thinking into situations, but they're still role playing a lot of real situations. And then as they get somewhere between 6 and 8, it's like clockwork. They begin to organize themselves and create hierarchies and a pecking order of sorts, and they diversify the labor like you were talking about before. And that's not always nice and clean. It can be a little bit messy, but watching them do that really prepares them for life.
Yeah. One of the really cool things I think my homeschool was more kind of eclectic, so we picked and choose which curriculums worked for us. And once we had the core subjects taken care of, we were pretty much unschooling for everything else. And one of the things that really brought all of my siblings and I together is that from a very young age, all of us would play make believe, and we would come up with complex stories, and each of us would take turns being the leader and kind of telling the story, and each of us would play characters. And as we grew older, and we all, most of us were teenagers, we continued telling stories and writing them down and collaborating with these different stories. And so we still have that bond that we've developed at a young age. And we wanted to tell better stories. Once we got to, like you said, about 8, when I was about 8, I started being like, kind of becoming more cognizant of like watching TV shows and watching movies and being like, I want to tell stories like that are interesting and intricate. And so I would start doing more research on storytelling. And I would share what I found with my siblings, and then they would do their own research. And so this developed into a lifelong love of stories and storytelling. And I'm currently publishing my debut novel on my blog. My brother is publishing a serialized story with original music and original artwork on his blog. My sister is publishing I think she just published the 47th page of her webcomic. Um, and so all of these stories that we spent time developing and sharing, even if those aren't the stories we end up publishing, we have this special bond that started with structured play, of us wanting to tell these stories to each other. And it developed into a lifelong love of learning and storytelling. And so I just want to encourage anyone whose kids are really enjoying make believe, and that there isn't an age limit on that. Play is something that and imagination is something that, if you can help your kids to be able to develop that and hold on to that as they get through their teen years, when they're in the I'm an adult and I want to be serious now, so make believe I'm done with make believe. Our parents were just like, well, why don't you actually write your stories, and so that you can publish them later. And so they were able to give us the tools that we needed to be able to continue to develop our imagination. And I think that that's so important if you see that in your kids, whether that is you see an engineering skill. They're always with their blocks. They're doing things that are more complicated. Um, or whether that is that they're constantly drawing, like my sister who has a illustration business now. She was always drawing something. And so my mom made sure that she had access to art courses, but paying attention to how kids are playing. Are they being creative? Are they being structured? Are they interested in the rules and the bureaucracy? What is it that really is they're drawn to when it comes to play, and providing them with resources to be able to develop those skills? I think character building and then skill building as well, I think is just such an important thing. And I think from my experience as a homeschool graduate, where play was there was time that was specifically set aside for playing outside or playing inside, I can just tell everyone that it made such a big difference, I feel, for any of those times that we had playtime, but we wanted to learn something, right? We wanted to learn something about history, because in the story I was telling, it was set in the 1930s. So I had to go and research what kind of food would be in the 1930s, because I wanted to make it realistic. So providing them with free time to be able to pursue these fun interests, I think that you'll find they're going to develop, and if you give them those tools that they need to be able to develop these skills, research and play, and you're going to find that they're going to become lifelong learners because they enjoy that. And it's not something that was forced on them.
I think one thing I would add into, and we sort of started with that idea about the time and the flexibility is that screen time. And I might not make many friends when I say this, but my children grew up. I have 8 children, so I have a span, and they're about every 2 years apart, but we call them family 1.0 and 2.0 just because there was a division. You know, you have the big kids and the little kids. Well, the big kids, the internet, screen time, everything was not such a big deal then. But the other half, it was a bigger deal. The world was a different place. Let me say it that way. The world was just a different place. We still had choices what we did in our own family with screen time. But I found that once there was more available screen time, and there's games and things that you can do there, and that can even be cooperative, but there also needs to be a time in the day where you have to work harder to make sure that your children are bored enough to play creatively, where there's a time where you can't, during our chunk of time, if they were bored and saying, I'm bored, they didn't say it very often because I said, oh, well, that's good news. If you're bored, I have some things you can do because it would break my heart if you were bored. And I had a bucket with some toothbrushes in it, and they were always welcome to scrub my woodwork. We lived in a log cabin, and they could do that because I said, I really don't want you to be bored. And I knew that wasn't what they meant. But suddenly those creative juices would start to flow. And we live in an area where there's red mud. It's clay. Our dirt is clay. And they would be making things out of clay and baking it in the sun. They would begin to live out a recent book that we had read together. Whether it was Island of the Blue Dolphin, they were out doing whatever they thought that those characters would have done. And so much can come out of that play, but it's not automatic. We really have to create that dead space, if you will, that's just not filled with other things, and really limiting screen time allows those creative juices to flow and have more of that imagination coming out of them rather than an entertainment means of games.
Yeah, I definitely agree. My parents definitely did that too. There was always, if they were bored, I learned pretty quickly that that meant that if I said that I was bored, that meant that I had to do a chore. And so very quickly, I remember when my younger brother was like, "I'm bored." I'm like, "Shh, shh, 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 it's okay. I have ideas. Don't say it. Don't say it too loud." Uh, and so I totally agree with that. I think that there's an importance of, depending on what works for your family, with me and I think my, you know, my sister and my brother, we didn't have that much screen time. We didn't have cable TV. Um, we had, the Netflix that we had, you had to get in the mail. um, so there was more dead space. And for my younger siblings, I feel like there was more screen time was just more available. There was more things that you could do that were, entertaining online. And so my personal opinion is, and what I plan to do for my family is that screen time is fairly limited until about 13. I would say, um, you know, watching cartoons, having some time set aside for that as a reward for doing chores, maybe. But you have to figure out what works for your family, and whether or not you work from home or, uh, you know. But I do agree that having time for kids to be bored and for them to have to figure out what to do is so important. Um, but like I said, providing them with the tools, blocks, Legos, dress up clothes, having these different things available for them to be able to play with that are real in the real world, that are concrete, that they can be able to do, whether that's clay, or whether that is Lego blocks. I totally agree with you on that.
My family is on the opposite side. My husband is a big video gamer, and my kids both love video games. We actually, funnily enough, we're living in a school bus right now, and we are usually off grid. So we have solar panels and good batteries, but we're always like, oh, sorry, we don't have enough battery power to run the PC right now. But they do also have tablets. I will sometimes, I'm like, okay, you've been on your tablet a lot today or the last several days. It's going to go live in my room for a while. You have to go outside and play, especially when the weather's good. But there's also times when my son gets on my husband's PC and plays some of these video games where he is doing all sorts of cool stuff, half of which I don't even understand. But, there are some really, really, really cool video games out there that are educational. Games that come to mind are Kerbal Space Program, which actually teaches like orbital dynamics. And what was the other one? Assassin's Creed has a lot of historical elements. My son's been enjoying Dawn of Time, I think, which is like human evolution, beginning of civilization, that sort of thing. There's a bunch of different war games where they have to plan the different strategies and all of that. So there are good points to screen time. And I just think it's important to have a balance,
Mm-hmm.
especially if my kids are just watching Netflix on their tablets. That's when they end up living in my room for a while. But
Exactly.
there are lots of cool things that they can do and learn online too.
Well, we didn't get a Wii console until much later, but when I was a young teen, and my siblings were kind of teenagers into that range, that's kind of when we started actually getting into gaming. And we had like Lego games. And there's all kinds of skills that you can learn from that. You have to, most of them are cooperative. You actually have to have two players that agree to work together. And there's different building games. There's all kinds of really cool stuff that you have that are available for even like younger kids, like you said. And so I think that there is definitely an educational benefit, especially if you have a little bit of not very much space, to having digital games that they can play that are educational, or that you can even make educational. Uh, and so I think that there's definitely some things that you can learn from these different games for sure.
Yeah, and I want to clarify too that I see the benefit in that. And I remember my oldest son really learned history. I think the game was called Age of Empires. This is old, like in the beginning where you had those kind of learning games. And he played that almost every day and learned so much. And so I do agree totally. There is so much they can learn, and so many things are simulation. And it's only going to get better, and as far as just where, like these with the Oculus and things like that, like field trips, virtual field trips and things, virtual surgeries, virtual everything, that you'll actually feel like you're doing that hands on. And so I think that there's a lot of value in that. And I just wanted to couch what I was saying is that also providing a time during the day where that's not an option so that they are compelled to do something else, even if that's a reward for after that quiet time, that quieter play. And they'll maybe give themselves over to it knowing something good is coming on the other end.
Well, do you guys have anything else that you would like to add to people who are curious about adding more play to their homeschool?
I would say just do it. Even if it's just with a deck of cards or just telling stories like you did, Amelia, just however you need to do it, just do it. And it doesn't matter how old your kids are, everybody can benefit from more play.
I
And I'll
totally agree.
add to that and say, especially if your child gets into a sticky place, like maybe multiplication tables or spelling or reading, some of the best remediation for that is playing games where it's fun. They can make a mistake, but it's all in play. And again, it's going to increase their capacity to remember that and to learn that and be able to use that. And last of all is listen. Just listen for your opportunity to be invited into their play, because sometimes you don't even know what you might miss if you're too busy doing so many other things. But if a child invites you into their world of imagination, take a minute to join them there. So I remember one story that sticks with me. I have a blog post about it where my little granddaughter decided that my husband and I were sea turtles, and she fed us and she took care of us. She was 2 years old. And so for that 10 minutes, that's all it took. For that 10 minutes, we were sea turtles. And she was taking care of us and changed her little world. And it changed ours too, because we were invited into that moment with her. So don't be too busy to miss those opportunities.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you guys are curious to learn more about game schooling, you should definitely check out Gypsy Gameschooler, the blog that Ashley Wright shares. She also has a YouTube channel where she reviews board games. And Lori, she has everything you need for optimizing your homeschool on on-track solutions. So definitely go and check out their blogs and websites if you guys want more information about how they can help
Thanks
you with homeschooling.
for
Thank you so
having
much
us.
for joining us, you guys.
Thank you, Amelia.